Well, welcome to a series of screencasts. You're talking about what I'm calling the Modern Web Development Toolkit. To give you a sense of where this came from, I was working with a colleague of mine. I do course development and I teach computer science classes at the undergraduate level. And we both noticed that there are a lot of tools and technologies that are in use in the real world as professional programmers, but students don't typically get exposed to them. And my theory here is that, first of all, none of them are a big enough deal that you can build a course around them. And also, computer programming textbooks don't mention them because they have to do with the nuts and bolts of actually getting your application out there, doing deployment, doing version control, stuff like that. So I came up with the idea of putting together a kit of software, frameworks, templates that a programming student, primarily a web programming student, can use to not only get on top of current technologies, but to also make their course projects a lot easier. So, as I said, it's aimed at programming students, mainly web programming students, but other languages and application programmers can also use these. It's infrastructure only. Well, by what you mean, it's back-end stuff. It does not require you to use, say, Visual Studio or Xcode or NetBeans. You can use any front-end tool you want with it. You can use Notepad with this stuff. It's all back-end housekeeping stuff, but it really does help. Also, it's about solving today's problems with today's tools. You go out into the real world with your shiny bachelor's in software application development and go to the workplace, and suddenly they say, well, you're going to have to get onto our version control repository and do some commits and pull requests and so forth, and you're just kind of going, what? And so you need to know this before you get out there and start looking for work. So that's the idea. The other piece is the tools all have to be free, and they should be cross-platform. Not everybody's running Windows these days. Particularly we're noticing as incoming students, fewer and fewer of them are running Windows. We've got people running on Macs. We've got people coming in with Linux or Chrome OS. So we need to be aware of that and just to be realistic. So starting out, what you need before you start, you're going to need Node.js, you're going to need Git, and you're going to need a GitHub or Bitbucket account. What are those? Let's talk. Node.js is a JavaScript runtime. What that means is you can run your JavaScript code anywhere, not just in the browser. You can run it on the desktop. You can run it on the server. Node.js has really opened up the world of application development by letting you use the same JavaScript code that you were doing with your websites and your web apps, and then use them everywhere else if you want. The main reason you're using Node is because the Node package manager is what we'll be using to install a lot of these tools, and some of them are built on Node. So get that. Git, on the other hand, this is version control software, and if you don't know what version control software is and you plan to be a programmer, get to know it. It's pretty easy to get started with. It's free, and you're really going to need it. So, Bitbucket or GitHub. What Git does is it manages your project code. It saves your changes. It tracks your changes. But by default, Git only saves your changes locally. It's a really good idea, however, to also be able to push your changes out to the internet, to some common internet server publicly available, for two reasons. First of all, it makes your project code available to you wherever you are. So you're working on your course project at home, cranking that through, then you save everything up, you push your changes out to, say, your Bitbucket repository, and then you get to work, and maybe you come to a coffee break, and you decide, I'm going to do some homework, so you connect to your Bitbucket account, you pull down your code, and you just keep working right where you are. So really, really handy. The second piece of it is it makes it a lot easier for you to work on a team project. So if you're on a more advanced course where you're working with other students, you can all just store your code up on a site like GitHub or Bitbucket and then add your changes and communicate and collaborate with each other. It makes it much, much easier than trying to do something together with email or Skype or IMs. First of all, I'm going to talk about is Yeoman. Yeoman is a web scaffolding generator. Scaffolding is really just the setup of your project folder. In other words, if you have ever, say, gone into Visual Studio and click on File, New Solution, or File, New Project, you have fired up Visual Studio's scaffolding tool. It asks you a few questions, and then it creates your project folder and sets up all the subfolders and files and configuration stuff that you need for your projects. You can just start doing it. Yeoman is that as well, but it doesn't really care what you use as front end. It'll just set up the project folder for you. And it does this using generators, and each generator has a specific set of tools and configuration settings, and there are literally thousands of them available. And if you don't find a generator that works for the project that you've got, then just build your own. How to install it: npm, Node Package Manager, MySG, Global. Everyone needs to use it. Install, and yo. Yo is the name of the command, and for some reason, I really like that. Go to yeoman.io and get more information about it. There's plenty of documentation. There are literally thousands of Yeoman generators out there. And as I said, build your own if you don't like any of those. Grunt is the next one. Works very well with Yeoman. It's a build tool. You've also used build tools before, but chances are you didn't realize it. When you go into your Xcode or Eclipse and you go to run your code, you generally have to click on build and then run, or hit run, and then it does a build, so it will compile and link and do all this background stuff that is necessary for your code to actually do something. And Grunt lets you do this, but it's mostly for web code, websites, web applications, and it basically does the repetitive housekeeping stuff in the background, the stuff that you really don't want to be dealing with. The Grunt configuration file is written in JavaScript, so you don't have to learn any new scripting language or arcane configuration syntax. Just write it using the same JavaScript that you're using for your main project. And it's pretty extensible and pretty straightforward. How to install it: npm install mysg grunt-cli. And Grunt gets its knowledge through the use of plugins. So if you want Grunt to be able to do some new kind of task, then just make sure the appropriate plugin is installed. Write your own plugins, and it's very hackable, very extensible. Bower is the third of the triumvirate of Yeoman, Grunt, and Bower for your development workflow. It's a package manager. If you've used Chocolatey on Windows, if you've used Homebrew on Mac OS X, if you have a Linux desktop, then you know what a package manager is for the operating system. It installs, updates, and removes software packages and keeps everything organized and handles whatever dependencies that particular packages need. Bower is an application package manager. So if you've got a project that's more complicated than Hello World, then chances are it's going to require some additional packages and frameworks to go with it to make it work. For example, Bootstrap requires jQuery. Now, if you forget to link in jQuery, Bootstrap's not going to work. So, but Bower knows about this, so Bower would take care of this for you. Once again, this is back-end housekeeping stuff, so you can concentrate on coding. How do we install it? npm install mysg Bower. And here's the website, bower.io. And there's plenty of documentation. You can look through the packages available. It's really kind of nice. I'm going to have a screencast that will show you how Yeoman, Grunt, and Bower work together for your programming workflow. Bootstrap is not a tool. I mentioned that a little bit earlier. It's a framework. It's some pre-written CSS and JavaScript code that lets you very easily and quickly create responsive websites, responsive web applications. What do I mean by responsive? Responsive means that it looks good regardless of what browser or what device you are rendering it on. So my web application will look great on my desktop flat screen monitor, but it'll also look great on my smartphone. And I don't have to change any of the code to make it do that. I don't have to have a separate mobile site or a separate desktop site. GUI tools are available to your layout. You can write out and use this code by hand, but you can also do drag and drop and do your layout very, very easily. There's a lot of free tools available for it. But I would say learn Bootstrap. It's pretty easy. There's lots of tutorials out there. It's very consistent. One thing you'll notice as you start picking it up is just how, sort of straightforward it is. There aren't a whole lot of exceptions. Like, well, this is how you do this thing, except when you're in this situation. No, it's all like, here's how you do this, and oh, by the way, it's also how you do this, and how you do this, and how you do this. It's all very well organized. So getbootstrap.com if you want to find out more documentation or how to incorporate it into your web project is the place to go. Now, boilerplate or web starter kit, these are also not tools or frameworks per se. They are templates. We've all used templates in, say, a word processor. If I'm trying to, say, write a business letter, I could write it from scratch, or I could just go up and pull a template for a business letter and then use that. And this is the same thing, but it's for web projects. And they will give you all of the kind of scaffolding, I guess you would call it, the styles, the JavaScript codes, some basic HTML. You can just start working. And they're really easy to work with. You just download a zip file, unpack it, and there's your project folder. Just open it up in whatever your favorite coding tool is and start going at it. So boilerplate. Boilerplate is pretty solid. I actually prefer boilerplate to web starter kit, and I'm talking about that in a moment. It's very straightforward. I'd say this is a good place to start if you want to mess around with templates, is go with boilerplate. Web starter kit, this is a Google thing, and it kind of, to a certain extent, it depends on what your attitude towards Google is. I'm a big Google ecosystem guy, and I love their documentation and their tutorials, but web starter kit requires some additional add-ons like Ant and Sass and Ruby that I'm just not, that's really not part of my infrastructure. So I stick with boilerplate. But so I would say start with boilerplate, and then if you need a little more something, take a look at web starter kit and see if that'll work for you. Emmet, this is another one of those, not a tool, it's a plugin. But what it does is autocomplete for HTML and CSS. For you Microsoft people, that's known as IntelliSense. This is autocomplete on steroids. It's amazing. It comes as part of multiple web plugins, both online and desktop, and it uses macros to expand out and write code for you. So you just type a little macro, type tab, and then that expands out into really, really a lot of code, depending on how you set it up. It has some built-in macros. You can write your own. The Emmet is written in JavaScript, so it's very easy to incorporate into your applications and other applications. And the macros are built using the text format JSON, JSON, JavaScript object notation. So it's relatively easy to customize Emmet. It's good documentation, walks you through the basics, gets you going. I'm going to have a screencast about Emmet coming down the road. If you want to find out where you can use Emmet, go to the download page, and it'll show you the text editors and online services and cloud IDEs that have Emmet support. I can tell you that once I started using Emmet, I really don't want to not use it. I refuse to use a code editor that does not have Emmet support at this point. It's just that good. VirtualBox, not strictly a programming tool, but can make your programming project easier. What it does is it lets you run multiple operating systems on your desktop. You don't have to buy a second computer. You don't have to dual boot, do any fussing with your hard drive format or anything. Just install VirtualBox and load up your operating systems in a VirtualBox virtual machine. And the advantage for programmers is it's to let you very quickly set up a workspace where you can do your application development. So say if I'm a Mac developer, but I'm supposed to deploy my application to Windows, I would just set up my Windows virtual machine and just have at it. And I don't have to, say, buy a Windows PC to do my work. Now, let me tell you this about VirtualBox. Very powerful, very hackable. It has a very lively development community. But if you're a programmer, I would suggest install VirtualBox and then forget that you have it. And here's why. Vagrant. Vagrant basically makes you not have to fuss with VirtualBox at all. It's wonderful. Vagrant is a tool that lets you install and configure and deploy virtual machines with just a single command. It's really easy to use, and it's just fantastic. I don't fuss with VirtualBox anymore. I just do all my virtual machines using Vagrant. You also don't have to buy or install or set up your own virtual machines. There are a bunch of pre-built machine images that you can use with Vagrant. And just find the one that you like and just tell Vagrant, okay, install this and run it. And it'll do it. You don't have to fuss at all. It works great with VirtualBox. It also can work with VMware and Parallels and some other virtualization providers. But it was mainly designed to work primarily with VirtualBox, which is why I suggest the pairing. As a bonus, it's cloud aware. In other words, you don't even have to have VirtualBox. If you have an Amazon Web Services account, if you have a DigitalOcean account, Microsoft Azure, you can deploy a virtual machine to those cloud accounts without even having anything on your desktop. You don't have to have VirtualBox, but you can manage it out there on the internet, and it's really, really nice. So go to vagrantup.com. The documentation is great. They have a nice walkthrough that takes you through setting up your first virtual machine using Vagrant, and then just sort of digs in really as deep as you want to go. They also have a page where you can look up the machine images that are available to you. Just search on what operating system you're interested in or what applications, services, and you'll find something to sort of fit your project. I even saw a SQL Server. I saw a Microsoft SQL Server image up there. There's a couple of them, so it's not just Linux stuff. Now, if you're doing web development, web application development, to a certain extent, that means you're doing mobile web application development. If you're doing that, you're going to need something like Cordova or PhoneGap. These are frameworks. What they do is they let you take your web application code and deploy it to, say, iOS or Android or Windows Phone and whatever without having to learn the native languages for those platforms. PhoneGap is Adobe. It is based on Cordova. It's from the Apache Foundation. I would recommend, if you're just getting started with these, start with Cordova. Cordova, it's pretty straightforward to get working on it, and PhoneGap works at a certain level, works just like Cordova. So it's a very gentle learning curve going from Cordova to PhoneGap. PhoneGap adds you some additional build options and features, including a desktop tool. So, there's some nice to haves there. Start with Cordova. What each of them do, however, whichever one you use, they take your web application and they wrap it in native code. So now your web app can access the GPS or the accelerometer or the camera on your mobile device just like a natively coded application can. And the beauty of it is I can have a single code base for my application, but I can deploy it to multiple mobile platforms using either of these frameworks. And it's very, very easy to manage your application stuff here. So recommend it. Once again, it's free, cross-platform. Install it using Node. So Apache Cordova, Plenty of documentation here. Free, it's open source. It's a good way to get started. Toolkit, it's Adobe. You're going to need an Adobe account to get into this, but they're free, so it's not that bad of a deal. It does add some extra build options, including a cloud deployment service, which is kind of a little optional extra there. So Adobe wants to make a little money on this, which is fine. I have no problem with that. Now, finally, browser-based developer tools. In other words, things that will let you do debugging and testing in your web browser for your web application or your website. I lean towards Chrome. I'm a Chrome guy. I lean towards Chrome DevTools, but every modern browser has these tools. Internet Explorer, Safari, Firefox, Edge, they all have development tools built in. Generally, you can get at them by just right-clicking on the page and selecting Inspect Element or Inspect, and that'll pull up your developer tools. Let's take a look at what we've got. So I've got the Chrome DevTools site here. Once again, Google has great documentation, and I pull this up in Chrome. So I right-click on the page, I select Inspect, and here are my dev tools. So I've got I can access every piece of CSS or HTML or JavaScript on that page. I see down there at the bottom, I've got a couple of security errors. If I were managing this page, I'd want to do something about that. And I can do things like performance testing, see why my page is taking so long to load, and just where my bottlenecks are and where my little bugs are, and do all sorts of cool stuff with it. Safari, if you are a Mac person and you like Safari, Safari does have developer tools. You can enable the developer menu in your preferences. It's just like a little checkbox. But it gives you pretty much the same kind of tools that Chrome does. Now let's look at Firefox. Firefox has a special developer edition, which is basically Firefox with nothing but developer tools add-ons, meant for, if you look up in there, next to the search box, you'll see a little wrench. That is your developer tools menu. There's a lot of cool stuff in here. If you're a Firefox fan, I don't think you're going to go far wrong. It's a lot of the same stuff here. Let's pull up the page in Firefox DevTools. A lot of the same stuff on there, but it's pretty cool. It's very nice. I might be tempted to switch over from Chrome, but I haven't quite decided yet. So let's look at stuff that's optional. That was the required things. That's sort of your basic kit. These optional tools are more of a nice to have. You don't necessarily really need them. They generally require a little more advanced, a little more experience. So maybe if you're in your junior or senior year, you might be using stuff like this. Just figure out, take a look at them. We're going to talk about them a little bit. You take a look and see if they really will work for you. So CoffeeScript is our first one. It's JavaScript generator, and what that means is it's a simplified scripting language that will let you churn out JavaScript code. And this makes it easier for you to debug and maintain your JavaScript. So if you have a project or a sort of a code base that has a lot of JavaScript in it, it might be worth your while to learn some CoffeeScript and start using it. But once again, we install it with npm, and you do need to be quite comfortable with JavaScript, I would say, before jumping on yet another scripting language. So coffeescript.org is the website if you want to check that out, try it, see if it would work for you. You don't need any special frameworks or other libraries installed. You can just start using JavaScript, using CoffeeScript. Selenium, this is a test integrated development environment for web browser testing. I think it's probably the simplest way I can do it. It's essentially, testing is part of any software application development, and if we can do it automated, all the better. Because if we can have the less effort that we put into our test, the more likely we're going to actually do our tests. So it's a client-server solution. The client is an add-on for Mozilla Firefox. So you do need Mozilla Firefox for this. The server runs on the desktop and is based on Java. So you will need Java installed. So this is not just sort of a simple one-step install and setup. The tests themselves are written in just plain old HTML. The syntax is really pretty simple. You can write them by hand, or you can just turn on the macro recorder in the Selenium add-on and have it watch you click on links and do stuff on their page, and it'll just record that and it'll generate the test code for you automatically, which is probably the simplest way to get going. So if you're into that, if you're interested, it sounds like something would be useful to you, seleniumhq.org. Let me point you that way. There's tons more information there. Once again, it's free, and will run on anything that Java and Firefox will. Finally, Jasmine. This is a unit testing framework specifically for JavaScript. We talked about application testing, website testing. Unit testing, if you're not familiar with the term, is where you test just a single chunk of code rather than the entire block of application code. Unit testing is a very important skill to use. It will, in the long run, make you more productive once you're used to it because it keeps problems small. So bugs never get a chance to develop into full-blown monsters because you're testing each little chunk of code. And as long as they keep testing okay and those unit tests come out, then you're on pretty solid foundation, and it really saves you a lot of time in the long run. So doesn't need any special framework or library. It just, anywhere you run JavaScript, you can use Jasmine. So if you're got a JavaScript application on the desktop, on the server, in the browser, you can go ahead and use Jasmine for your unit testing. So jasmine.github.io, get over there if you're interested, take a look at it, and see if this would be something useful to learn. Finally, Less or Sass. These are both what are known as CSS preprocessors. And like CoffeeScript, they have a sort of a simplified syntax for generating CSS code. If you have a lot of CSS that you have to manage, or a lot of it involved in your project, it might be worthwhile to pick up one of these just to help you deal with the complexity. As I like to call it, it's CoffeeScript for CSS. But once again, you need to be comfortable with CSS code first. This is not a shortcut to having to avoid learning CSS. You really do need to know CSS. So there are GUI tools available to help you with this. There are web-based tools available to help you generate your Less or Sass code. So lesscss.org. Check it out. sasslang.org. sasslang.com, excuse me. See if this would work for you. If you have a lot of style sheets to deal with, might be worth investing a little bit of time. So finally, what is the Modern Web Toolkit about? The idea is to make your coding projects easier. Handling all this back-end housekeeping stuff, this infrastructure stuff, you can focus on just coding and design. Also, you can use them with any IDE. You can use Notepad if you want, because it's all back-end stuff. So that's what I've got. I want to thank you very much. Be sure to tune in for the follow-up screencast, which will show you these tools in action. And I thank you very much for your attention.